We are back with our roundtable. Joining me now, former Obama press secretary and senior advisor to the president's 2012 re-election campaign, Robert Gibbs, Republican strategist, Ana Navarro, who was the national Hispanic chair for the McCain campaign in 2008, New York Times columnist David Brooks, and founder and chairman of the Faith and Freedom Coalition, Ralph Reed. Welcome all. Happy Super Bowl Sunday.
Thank you.
David, I want to start with Chuck Hagel. You heard what Leon Panetta said. The political knives were out. How much of it was politics and how much of it was a poor performance by Chuck Hagel?
It was him. You ever have this nightmare? You're back in college. You've been nominated to be the defense secretary. You haven't done any of the studying all term, and the confirmation hearing is in 5 minutes. It looked like that. It looked like that. A guy unprepared. Unprepared even to defend himself. Look strong. He's being attacked. His integrity is being attacked. His honesty is being attacked. Hit back. Demand some time. Defend yourself. You got to do that because you got to have the confidence of the president when you get the job, and I think he's going to get the job. You got to have the confidence of the generals in the building. And so this is a problem. If I were Chuck Hagel, I'd go to the president right now and I'd say, do you still have confidence in me? Do you think I can do the job?
You would offer to potentially withdraw?
I think you got to if you think you're not going to be effective because of what's happened. Now, I'm not saying the answer is yes, but I think you got to go back and ask privately that question. You know,
and a lot of the conversations that the White House is trying to say is, this was all politics. Let me play a clip of your old boss questioning Chuck Hagel.
Were you correct or incorrect when you said that the surge would be the most dangerous foreign policy blunder in this country since Vietnam? Were you correct or incorrect? Yes or no?
My reference to the surge being the most dangerous.
Senator Hagel, the question is, were you right or wrong? That's a pretty straightforward question.
Well,
I would like to answer whether you were right or wrong, and then you are free to elaborate.
Well, I'm not going to give you a yes or no answer on a lot of things.
Show that you refuse to answer that question.
And now viewers may not know the history here a little bit between Chuck Hagel and John McCain. They were very close friends in 2000. Not so in 2008 when it was clear Chuck Hagel, at least his wife, was supporting Barack Obama and Hagel wasn't endorsing John McCain. Was that personal?
I don't think so at all. Look, anybody who ever saw John McCain grill Donald Rumsfeld or Secretary Baker during the 80s on Central America knows that this is John McCain. This is his job. They are there to advise and consent, not to rubber stamp. And if they're not going to get the scrutiny and the tough questions now, when are they going to get it?
Why was he so much tougher on Hagel than John Kerry?
Because there's so many inconsistencies.
They have the same position on the surge.
But it's because of the inconsistencies with Hagel. I don't remember a hearing where there were clarifications to clarifications that then had to be clarified. When there were so many, I regret having said that. When there were so many, what I meant to say, what I should have said, because he was doing a terrible job, because he's not giving answers. John Kerry gave answers. We just saw an interview with Leon Panetta where he gave answers. He answered masterfully. We saw 3 tough hearings this week. We saw Secretary Clinton go through Benghazi. We saw John Kerry go through a hearing, and we saw Chuck Hagel. And you cannot compare the first 2 to Chuck Hagel. After I watched that hearing, I remembered, the lyrics of that country song. You mean I shaved my legs for this? You mean we're having this huge fight over this guy who cannot even articulate our policy towards Iran?
Robert?
No, let's be clear. I mean,
this performance was not good.
Let's split this into 2 things because I want to build off something that Anna just said. If you turned on C-SPAN and hadn't watched TV in the intervening 6 years, you'd think we'd had 150,000 troops parked right now in Iraq. The next defense secretary is not going to deal with Iraq and the surge. This was a vanity thing for John McCain to try to prove to a former friend who disagreed with him that he was right on the surge and that Chuck Hagel was wrong.
What should Hagel have said? What would you have told Chuck Hagel to say in response?
I think he said correctly, we're going to let history judge Iraq. Because, quite frankly, Chuck Hagel could have said, Senator McCain, I think I might have been wrong on Iraq. Were you wrong on Iraq? Here's the question. None of that is anything that the next Secretary of Defense is going to deal with. But hold on. Let's split this into 2 buckets. So there was the totally superfluous questions that, quite frankly, again, not going to bear in big measure on what the next Defense Secretary does. The disconcerting thing, obviously, that for anybody that watched it was he seemed unimpressive and unprepared on the questions that, quite frankly, he knew was coming.
He had mock hearings. Going to what David said, should he go to the president and say, you still have confidence in him?
Again, I'm reminded 3 weeks into the first term of the Obama administration, Tim Geithner gives a speech at the Treasury Department about our banking industry and how to save it. 3 weeks into the administration, 3 weeks into his tenure, the market dropped 382 points.
It wasn't a
2 weeks ago, Tim Geithner walked out of the Treasury Department 4 years later as one of the most influential Treasury secretaries in the history of our country. So we get into all these kerfluffles about one hearing or a few answers. Chuck Hagel is an infantryman who's had to execute the orders of the Secretary of Defense and the Commander-in-Chief and understands what those people go through, and he's going to be a good Secretary of Defense.
Ralph, I know we talked about this. Bill Kristol wrote the following, comparing Chuck Hagel to Harriet Miers and almost calling or daring Democrats and liberals to do what conservatives did with Harriet Miers when she was nominated to the Supreme Court by George W. Bush in 2005. He writes, conservatives and Republicans had no grudge against Harriet Miers. They simply thought she wasn't a first-rate candidate. They were confident that Bush, the court, and the country could do better. It wasn't pleasant in 2005 for conservatives and Republicans to oppose a nominee, in this case a close friend of a president they supported. It certainly wasn't pleasant to give any comfort to the president's critics. Still, to use a corny but apt expression, it was the right thing to do, and a willingness to do it was a sign of health of American conservatism. You think are you surprised more Democrats aren't publicly raising concern?
I am surprised, and I think privately it's window rattling how much Democrats behind the scenes are saying that this was an abysmal performance by Senator Hagel. He's the wrong man for the wrong job at the wrong time. And by the way, there were far more questions about the issues that prospectively he would deal with as Secretary of Defense than his record. The reason why his position on the surge in Iraq is so critical is because it speaks to his judgment. But when it comes to Iran, let's remember, Chuck, he voted against designating the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization at a time when the intelligence was clear that they were killing U.S. soldiers in Iraq. This is somebody who wants to command U.S. troops. The Revolutionary Guard is killing our troops. And he voted against calling it a terror.
David and Robert, I want you both to tackle something here. Wait, it's the confidence. He may get confirmed, David, but will he have the ability to go back before that Armed Services Committee and sell cuts to the Defense Department?
Well, he will if he has the ability to do it. That's what we don't know. We don't know whether he has the ability. So look at what the next defense secretary is going to have to supervise massive defense cuts with vested interests. He's going to have to make key decisions. Do we do long-term technological advance or do we do short-term readiness? These are going to be tough questions with tough constituencies. You have to be able to present leadership and toughness. Now, he is personally a tough guy. I've seen him oppose the Iraq war with other Republicans. He personally has that kind of courage. But can he project that kind of courage and show mastery of the building? Is really...
Robert, very quickly, the ability to be a salesman.
Absolutely.
A politician.
Let's divide politics from all of this. Ralph just said this was about judgment. And then David just said opposing the war in Iraq takes courage. I think the notion in some ways to say because Chuck Hagel doesn't believe what John McCain says, you question his judgment. I think for somebody that carried a gun in the jungles of Vietnam, I'm going to trust their ability besides
Hagel doesn't believe what he said 10 years ago and 12 years ago.
I want to move on. I want to change topic. I want to go to immigration. Here was Chuck Schumer this week on the issue of immigration.
For the first time ever, there's more political risk in opposing immigration reform than in supporting it.
Anna Navarro, you are closely advising Marco Rubio, who is a part of this group with a bipartisan group of senators. Is Chuck Schumer right? Do you buy that there is more political risk opposing it than supporting it?
I think there's political risk on both sides, and I'm very proud of what Marco Rubio is doing on stepping outside of the political safe zone, of really going out on a limb and leading. I think he's making a big difference in how this issue is being received by the conservative base. He is a Hispanic Republican. They give him deference because of that. He also is very popular with the conservative base and put a lot of time and effort into selling these principles, explaining these principles before they were announced. A week or 2 weeks before they were announced, he was on the radio, he was on TV all the time explaining it to the conservative base and also in Spanish to the Hispanic community. It needs to be supported by both.
Ralph, National Review respectfully came out against Marco Rubio's plan. This is what they said. He's wrong about how to go about repairing our immigration system. Wrong to think that an amnesty and enforcement bill at this time will end up being anything other than the unbuttered side of a half a loaf of bread, and there is no reason to make a bad deal for fear of losing a Latino vote Republicans never had. You were part of the Bush re-elect team. They did get a big chunk of the Latino vote. This editorial seemed a little bit off on recent history.
Well, the Republicans have now lost 4 out of the 6 presidential elections since the Berlin Wall fell. And the only 2 that they won, the candidate was somebody from a border state with Mexico who said that family values don't end at the Rio Grande, and whose vision for the future of the country
You work with a lot of social conservatives. That message going to work?
Well, I think so, and I'll tell you why. Because, first of all, the devil will be in the details, if I can use that metaphor. Yeah. But people of faith are commanded by Scripture, both Old and New Testament, to welcome the foreigner and show compassion for the immigrant. But there's a corollary responsibility, and that is the immigrant, from ancient times with the Israelites all the way to today, is to obey the law and show respect for the customs of the nation in which they resided. So, for example, you've got 1 million people who are spouses or children of people who are here legally.
With green cards.
Seeking a green card. Right. 200,000 of those are minor children. We don't believe, Chuck, that somebody who violated our laws as their first step on the road to becoming an American should take precedent over those minor children in entering the country.
Is this going to work? Yeah.
Can I take this from the sacred to the profane?
Yes.
I've been so frustrated this week. We've got an aging society with stagnant education levels. Out there's this global pool of talent who will start, if they come here, they'll start more jobs than natives. They'll pay more taxes than they receive. They'll create a much more dynamic economy. And the last week in Washington, we've been sidetracked off this potential to actually give some growth to our economy by issues of how many links are in the chain we're going to build in Mexico.
How many drones?
What's going to trigger what? Does gay marriage affect all this? It's like the moral capital of obtuseness. I mean, this is really our only shot at getting a growing economy. I think the Senate has done an outstanding job of putting this attempt to win the race for moral global talent out there, and we're debating something.
It does seem like the politics of this is coming together. Robert, we have you here. I want to quickly talk about guns in this respect. Here's the president, a picture of him skeet shooting. We know that there had been a kerfuffle. This idea was he really? The president said in an interview that yes, he had fired a gun. Yes, he had done skeet shooting. I do have to ask you, have you seen him skeet shoot?
I have not, but Camp David for him is a private retreat that he spends most of the time with his family. I don't think it's whether or not the president shoots a gun regularly, or even if he shoots it well.
Why did the White House participate in the conspiracy essentially by feeding the beast?
Oh, Chuck, because all you sit in the briefing room as you used to when I was there and ask us for photo evidence for anything that the president says or does. But let's not. I mean, the big political development this week in the debate on guns was that the NRA came out in favor of criminals having access to any weapon they'd like to in our society, walking back the same congressional testimony that they gave after Columbine, that having a universal background check to make sure that a criminal doesn't have access to a semi-automatic weapon. I mean, that's the real event that happened this week. I want
to show a little bit of this ad. I'm going to just roll it through here. Michael Bloomberg's putting up a Super Bowl ad, Ralph Reed and Anna, about putting off, supporting the universal background check bill, showing testimony of Wayne LaPierre in 1999 supporting a universal background check. Here's a little bit of that ad.
The NRA once supported background checks.
We think it's reasonable to provide mandatory instant criminal background checks for every sale at every gun show. No loopholes anywhere for anyone.
All right, I'll admit I need quick answers here. Can a Southern Republican vote for the background check bill and get reelected?
Well, look, a licensed gun dealer at a gun show already does a background check. That's already going on. So what we're talking about is antique and special collectors and private sales. I think that's going to be very difficult to legislate properly without killing gun shows.
Anna, there is an urban-rural split almost more so than there is inside the Republican Party than anything else. Urban Republicans from our hometown of Miami more supportive of this idea.
Yes, but I think both the Southern Republican and the urban Republican should all be voting for universal background checks. Look, Connecticut was a game changer. We need to understand that. The gun issue is here. It's not going away. Every other day, we are hearing about a tragedy on the news, and people keep asking, what are we doing about it? Republicans and the NRA should be part of the solution, should be part of the conversation, not just say no. And universal background checks is something that there could be consensus on.
Guys, I have to leave it there. Sorry, Robert. I'll get you. I'll get you again. I don't get. You used to be able to cut me off, so now I get to cut you off every once in a while. Thank you all. Yeah, it is fun.